Welcome to another book club. Today we're going to be discussing love, monogamy, and morality, and specifically this one paper which asks the question of whether or not monogamy is morally permissible or more morally correct than non-monogamous relationships or polygamous polyamory type relationships. It's not a very famous paper. It didn't even have many sightings. I think it had like 14 sightings. I kind of like came across it haphazardly. But it is a question that's come up and that comes up a lot in psychology of sex, psychology of love, philosophy of love, and so on. So let's kind of like walk through it more or less. It'll be a super short slide presenting the arguments, counter objections, all that type of stuff, and then we can just kind of chat about it. I guess like as a preface, I don't subscribe to many of these arguments, but I have a hard time coming up with good objections to them. Similar to the anti-natalist talk we had the other week, they were good arguments, but I disagreed with them, and I couldn't like present good arguments against them, at least at face value. So this paper, it's called "Is Monogamy Morally Permissible" by Harry Chalmers, and he starts it off with this. Hello. He starts it off with this thought experiment, basically. So, like, imagine there's a couple, like a romantic couple, but they say, okay, well, let's make a promise to each other. We're not allowed to have friends. Um, so most people would be like, okay, well, that's kind of morally troubling. Why can't you have friends? Um, we know that friendships, you gain a lot from these relationships between people. It's like a very meaningful connection. One would even argue it's a necessary connection for being human. We need this type of bond, this type of friendship, and it's just like a generally a good thing to have. You'd never like not want your partner to have no friends or anything like that. He tries to make the analogy then why is it the case that we find it so morally abhorrent or so morally like icky for someone to have multiple romantic relationships? If we don't draw the line with friendships, with the platonic relationships, why do we draw that line with monogamous ones? It's like prohibiting it's prohibiting some sort of a good for your partner. So his core argument, the main argument, is that both romantic friendships and or romantic relationships and amicable platonic friendships, they have a type of like goodness to them. They're good for us. They're healthy. We want those things, but we condemn one of them, not the other one. Why is that the case? That's like his whole like inquiry. The burden of proof, basically, the burden lies on the defenders of monogamy to make a case, to make a strong case, and to say that, well, it's okay to have this one and it's not okay to have this one. So the most common objections or defenses that come to the aid of the monogamous defender are firstly, like the first strategy that they take, or the first route that they take, is saying that no additional friends, or showing they need to show that no additional friends is morally worse than monogamy, because if that's not the case, then you can't really equivocate them. The second strategy that Chalmers presents is that we must show that monogamy has these type of like redeeming features, or like there must be an aspect to monogamy that is not included in the aspect of type of friendships, something that friendship lacks but that monogamy has. And so he kind of goes along and starts saying, well, if monogamy is less bad than otherwise, it doesn't make it permissible. So just because something is less bad, it doesn't mean it's okay. It's like saying lying isn't very good. Murder is definitely not good. But just because murder is definitely not good, it doesn't make lying okay. And that's kind of the angle he's attacking this at. It still makes lying morally wrong, even if it's a lesser wrong. He argues that both restrictions share a type of feature. They're denying access to an important good that a person has, or an important good that a person can have. a person can get a type of good from friendships, and a person can get types of good from romantic relationships, and we're preventing one of them. So he says, okay, let's get rid of the first strategy. That one doesn't really work. This leaves us with like the second strategy for defending monogamy. We need to find positive or like a firm, just, clear justifications for monogamy, instead of trying to, bolster the other side. So he goes along the 5 common defenses of monogamy that I'm pretty sure if you've ever had this like discussion with a friend or something like that, these have like almost definitely come up. Things like jealousy, things like taking care of kids, things like autonomy, all that type of stuff. So the first one he kind of presents is this specialness defense, and this one makes intuitive sense to me at face value. He says, or the monogamous defender will say that, well, monogamy, as opposed to other forms of romantic relationships, there's an innate specialness to them. They're like of a higher order than just like one night stands, than just like crushes, than things like that. And for that reason, for their specialness, we need to choose that over other ones. It's almost like being chosen exclusively is a lot more important than being chosen in general. And that's his one kind of the first defense that comes to mind when we're trying to make a case for a monogamy. A couple of issues come up with this type of defense, though. He says that if we apply the same type of logic about the specialness of certain relationships, wouldn't it mean that we shouldn't, like, that some friends are more special than others? Maybe it means that, like, it's weird to say that just because a friendship isn't incredibly special, then it's useless, or then we shouldn't, like, look towards it or like deal with it. Exclusivity doesn't exactly entail, if we're talking in logical terms, it doesn't entail higher value. So just because a friendship is exclusive doesn't mean it's of higher order of another friendship. The next defense that a monogamous person will try and or I guess some other concerns that can come along with this type of defense is that you can't conflate exclusivity with emotional value. Just because something is exclusive doesn't mean it's more it holds more emotional merit. It's like, imagine you have a sibling and both of you have a close relationship with your mother. She doesn't have a type of like exclusive relationship, like you're the only kid, you're the favorite. She loves both of you guys. Does that make her love to you less meaningful? Maybe, maybe not. Arguments could be made. Yeah, I also kind of disagree with that framing of this of his argument. I'm just trying to be as charitable to Harry Chalmers here in his paper, but we'll go over a lot of the things we disagree with, I guess. So he's claiming that, okay, well, the specialness defense, it doesn't work because the specialness must come from the quality of the relationship, not really the exclusivity of the relationship. You can have a lot of special relationships, and just because they're not exclusive doesn't mean that they're not special. The next one is the sexual health defense. So sometimes you try and take, or monogamists will try and take the route of, okay, well, what monogamy means is not having sexual relations with others. That kind of leaves a gap, though, for the more gray areas of cheating. So like flirting with other people, even like hugging other people, kissing people on the cheek, all that type of stuff. How do we account for that? How does that fit into the framework of monogamy, non-monogamy? It's almost like there's degrees of monogamy to non-monogamy. And on one, like on the strict monogamy side, it would be like never engaging romantically ever. Maybe a little like closer to the middle would be like, okay, a little bit of flirting is okay. And then over here would be like, okay, maybe like holding hands with someone else and then kissing is okay, but at the end I don't yeah, I think your mic just went on randomly or something. But yeah, that's the first kind of like sexual defense, whatever. The next one is, okay, well, what about maybe we can try and defend monogamy because of the risks of transmitting sexual diseases or things like that. Okay, well, modern medicine has kind of like made its rounds. There are vaccines and preventative measures we can take. We can, yeah, like wear condoms or get vaccinated, all that type of stuff. Treat most STDs. That defense, it's a little bit, it worked a lot more 1,000 years ago, not so much anymore. Then there's also this idea of moral overreach. So who are you to impose your views on someone else's autonomy? And that's just like one of the basic like categorical principles that Kant puts over. It's like you're not supposed to impose the autonomy of other people if they, choose to do X, Y, Z. It's not really up to you to say yes or no. Avoiding this type of sexual risk doesn't justify restricting someone else's autonomy. And then, just like I kind of already went over slightly, is you can negotiate boundaries, like maybe a little bit of flirting is okay, maybe holding hands is okay, kissing is definitely not okay, and so on and so on and so on. And this is kind of what Chalmers is saying here. The children defense. This one is a bit stronger of a defense in my opinion. It says, well, children need monogamous relationships, or like a stable monogamous relationship for their parents, for them to grow up in emotionally intelligent, to have psychosocial capacities. And Chalmers here is saying that there's very weak empirical evidence that demonstrates this. He brings up like a study by chefs saying, well, no, like kids who grew up in a non-monogamous household were just as well adjusted as kids who grew up in monogamous households. This we'll talk about a little bit after, because there's actually a lot of conflicting evidence with this, and I pulled up a couple of studies that you guys could do some further reading on, suggesting the otherwise. So I wouldn't think it's as clean cut as just saying it's empirically weak, because I don't think it's empirically contentious or contended. Privacy is enough would be kind of the other point in the children defense, and it's saying that even if children benefit from seeing monogamous parents, the parents can always shield them from that, so they can have like almost like secret sexual relations without their kids knowing about it, and in that way you can preserve the apparent monogamy and the benefits that would come from having monogamous parents and so on. And then another one is that breakups happen in all relationships. So showing your kids that breakups can happen and you can deal with them and it'll be okay might even be possibly like emotionally healthy and help them like emotionally regulate further down in the future. It's showing them how real relationships in life work. You split off from friends, partners will leave you, you'll leave partners, and to have them grown up with just two parents that never separate, it might give them a distorted view of what human relationships might be like in their lives. And then there's also like this side point where it's saying, well, multiple adults in a kid's life can be very helpful. That's why we have like relationships with uncles and aunts and grandparents and stuff like that, and like this community that forms around you as you develop and as you grow up. It can be very, very beneficial. Imagine a monogamous couple who has no external support of no other adults. The children may be lacking in certain experiences than a kid with a large extended family with a lot of adults around them. So you could say, okay, maybe having more adults around in this non-monogamous way could be helpful to the kid. Issues, though, there's a lot of competing evidence, or I guess like competing findings in the literature of child development when it comes to the relationship that your parents had. I just cited two there, which this one, the findings in the first one were actually that monogamous households, or children who grew up with two stable parents, they ended up having better psychosocial outcomes, so abilities to like navigate tricky social situations and stuff like that. And there was another one that came out more recently, and it said that there was less bonding or adjustment issues in these types of kids who grew up in these households. So I wouldn't take Chalmers's point earlier on saying that there's no empirical evidence, because it's a little more contentious than that. There's a little more like finesse, I guess it takes. The practicality defense. This one, people will say, well, we have like limited time in our lives, limited emotional bandwidth, limited cognitive bandwidths, and to have more than one partner, it's just like not practical. So like, why would we even try that? We can't stretch ourselves so thin amongst so many partners and still expect good outcomes for ourselves. His claims or his arguments against that or go in saying that, well, like, just because something has a limit, it doesn't mean there's this type of like categorical or moral ban that should happen because of it. Things should be done because they're morally correct, not because there's some sort of like limit to them. It also says, like I kind of was, I spoke about a tiny bit earlier, that non-monogamy can be flexible, right? It doesn't have to be as extreme as looking at someone of the other sex turns into cheating and non-monogamy. There can be like a little more wiggle room for that type of stuff. And then he also says that sometimes, okay, well, monogamy causes exhaustion. One person, all your emotional, sexual, so and so needs. I would kind of fight back with this point. I don't think this is a very strong argument he's presenting. I wouldn't say that monogamy always causes exhaustion or anything like that, but it's a claim he puts forward. The jealousy defense, this is like the number one, jealousy is like the number one thing, I guess, that comes up when we're talking about why you're monogamous, why not. It plays like a really huge emotional role, more than we like to admit, even if we say we're not jealous people. It's just like a part of our anatomy and nature to be jealous and to envy. He thinks that monogamy prevents this type of jealousy. And from jealousy comes pain, insecurity, suffering, and so on. Um, and so maybe I don't know, here he starts to say a little bit like, well, no, we can flip the script, and maybe being in a monogamous relationship, that's what makes us jealous. Because there's this idea of scarcity. It's like, oh, I only have one partner, so now I need to be hyper vigilant of that one partner. I have nothing else. This idea of like scarcity, and that's the scarcity that breeds jealousy, not other types of things. Competition, fear of replacement, and so on. So he says, um, maybe it's not so much of a justification for monogamous relationships, just like a quirk in our personalities and in our psyches, that we need to work through, just like any other quirk in our personalities or psyches that we need to work through, like irrational fears and so on. Conclusion, what Chalmers says is like all of these defenses basically fail. They don't hold up to the test. Uh, but he's not saying, okay, no one should be monogamous. He's not imposing any type of moral views. He's just saying that there can be degrees to monogamy. Each partner or each couple can agree to where they draw the line, where not to, and so on. But just because partners have the right to choose this for themselves and for their own relationships, it doesn't mean it's more morally correct to have this type of relationship as opposed to a polyamorous, polygamous relationship. Non-monogamy is not radical, and so on and so on. That's where I'll leave it there. I'm sure a lot of you guys have tons of objections and things you want to say, so I'm just gonna go ahead and stop sharing the screen. And yeah, hear you guys out. What do you think? What was most troubling?
I disagree with his initial thought experiment. I think it's like super loaded, and it's just a bad thought experiment. Like the idea of, oh, because people would feel intuitively bad when they see people get into relationships and they say like, oh, hey, let's not have any more friends. Like two people get in a relationship and they're like, let's have no more friends other than the people within this relationship. The reason I feel like we have this intuitive feeling that that's a bad thing is more so because we, I guess, like intuit that there's some coercion going on, or that like something about the relationship is unnatural. I think that if it was the case that two people got in a relationship, they like independently of each other wanted to only have one friend. Like I only want one friend in my life. I want nothing more than one friend, and that's something that I've self-imposed on myself. No one else imposed that on me. And then another person has those exact same feelings. I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to be friends with each other and be each other's only one friend. I don't see anything intuitively wrong with that. Secondly, I don't know why you. I guess maybe I'm confused on his conclusion because at the end he seems to say that all relationships are like equal in a way, that like no relationship is more moral than another. So maybe I'm misinterpreting him here, but like the title is like, you know, is monogamy permissible? So it's implying that it's impermissible, which is confusing me. I just feel like as long as something is self-imposed, it seems permissible to me, and like you're consenting to it, and it's not causing harm to anyone else.
Okay, good points. Anyone else want to speak to that?
I think it would be interesting in that original example to distinguish what word did he use to say morally wrong? No, what phrase did he use to refer to that hypothetical couple?
Permissible. Like it's allowed. It doesn't mean it's more morally correct than something else, though.
Okay, so I think it would be a good idea to distinguish what we would call a red flag, which is something that hints at something going wrong, from something that is morally wrong. I mean, red flag would be more related to your culture. It could be very much more from person to person and from culture to culture. Like red flag here is not the same as a red flag in Japan, and so on. So in that case, you find two people with such behavior that's a big red flag that there's some coercion going on, an indicator, not strictly wrong per se, but something that is telling you that there's something probably weird going on. And if it's an indicator, then it's always in comparison with the rest of how society usually behaves. So red flags correspond to deviations from the usual behavior in a society. And this is different from, let's say, saying whether something is morally right or wrong.
I have a question. Where are we deriving what is like these if these red flags are indicative, possibly, culture dependent, but they might be indicative of moral rights and wrong. Where are we getting these ideas of moral rights and wrong? Because I think the first intuition we have, or like the first place we want to point at, is saying it's not natural, but that's just an appeal to nature fallacy. And we also know that in a lot of other, like historically speaking, or like just in a lot of other instances, it's perfectly natural, or it just has been the case that relationships are not monogamous. So I think appealing to nature is saying that it's morally correct because it's natural. That's already a mistake we're making in figuring out what's moral. So how do we figure out what's moral when it comes to this stuff?
I think it's more a statistical claim. Like, hey, this is sort of weird for the society we usually live in.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't there something weird going on? More like that.
So would you say then what's moral is just like what the mean of that culture is? So what's statistically most probable in that culture
No,
to
no, no,
occur?
not moral. I'm not making any moral claim.
Okay.
I'm just saying that this is what defines a red flag.
Okay. Yeah.
But a couple having these kind of boundaries, and if they reach this without any coercion, that's perfectly moral. A polyamorous couple, it's perfectly moral.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah.
Yeah, so English is my third language. I don't understand, didn't understood understand a lot of things, but can I say something about all this?
Yeah, go for it. Of
Hello,
course.
am I
Of course.
audible?
Of course, yeah.
So I think that monogamy, polygamy, both are like in a lot of cultures, we see polygamy as a kind of bad thing or a sin. I think these views which are made in us by some form of religious or social conditioning. And I see polygamy as a more natural thing in humans um, because there are a lot of people who cheat. So I think it's better that you go in a polygamous relationship directly than to cheat, especially for this modern times. And in some religions, like I'm from India, so I'm friend with monks and nuns too. So in some places, even monogamous relationship is a sin. Like I have a friend who is monk, and he is very young, just 20 years old, and he can't marry. Doing sex is a sin, and even for my nun friend. So it is also a form of conditioning, right? So I think an individual should choose his own path, whatever he likes. If I like to be with two, three girls at the same time, and I'm going to get married, I will say her that in future I might marry someone else, I might like someone else. So you should decide it upfront, and it's better than it's better to be in a polygamous relationship than to cheat. And a lot of people just want security and not love. That's why they choose monogamous relationship. I think that, and they don't, and they also don't want to be look bad in the eyes of the society and their family, friends, relatives, things like that.
Yeah, no, I think those are good points. Like, what we grow up being inclined to is very, very cultural. Like, it's very dependent on the religions that are around us, what our parents told us, what our cultures kind of tell us to do, what's right, what's wrong. And that's where I think a lot of people, I think that that's where there's a very strong case for saying that monogamy, it might be morally permissible, but it's not more correct than other forms of relationships. Yeah, thanks. I like that.
Can I add something?
Of course.
Okay, so I think so far we haven't really taken gender into consideration. And I think that if polygamy is accepted from both sides, then the problem of gender equality, inequality would not really be a problem. But that's only on the surface because across history and cultures, we've seen that women, they tend to form deeper emotional bonds with their partners. It could be due to a lot of reasons, you know, them seeking stability and support from their partners. And I think this kind of emotional attachment that they have, it can cause a lot of internal conflict within the women. Because men generally they tend to move on. But even if the woman is inclined towards polygamy, I think it would be a greater problem for her. And it would just not be suitable, I think, for women in general.
So you're kind of saying that there might be more internal conflict or psychological stress that might come from a woman's attachment in a relationship than a man's, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think.
You know, that's a good point. That could be the case. It is said, or like there I was in the my psychology of sex class, it kind of there was some evidence that went a little bit against that. And it's the idea that men never recover from relationships or from loves or things like that, whereas women tend to be able to move on. Um, so, but it is very interesting. There is a gender aspect there to at least heterosexual monogamous relationships. That's for sure.
That's interesting. I did not know that. That's interesting.
You know, it's one of those areas where there's just like a lot of conflicting evidence where there's no it's super hard to say. Um, but like I grew up thinking, or I still like in my culture, that's what's commonly thought, I guess. That like women attach themselves more, guys are more like whatever, they can, fuck off and they'll be fine. Um, but sometimes that's not the case.
I mean, it depends on the country and the geographical location as well. I mean, um, I feel like when you're comparing Europe with the subcontinent, in subcontinent, women have been nurtured and they've grown up in an environment where, from a young age, they learn to be really dependent on men, and you know, it's not a good thing. But in Europe, I think they learn to be independent from a young age, and they have, you know, their own ambitions. In the subcontinent, though, I don't think that's the case. So I think it would be really difficult for women there to adopt a polygamous relationship as opposed to somewhere else.
Yeah, no, like where I'm from Colombia, and down there it's a very very patriarchal like just like masculine, just like dominating society, and it's always understood that like the woman has to attach herself to a guy that can provide to her. Like that's the message that's basically like fed to everyone growing up. So it is incredibly, yeah, dependent on where you grew up or like what you're hearing.
Could I
Sure.
add something up?
Please.
Okay, thank you. Well, I was simply maybe, this could further the conversation or anything, but I would like to ask a question simply. Do you think what should be considered either good and bad in these contexts should be what is considered healthy, either psychologically, physically, or something of the sort? So I think that, that would be a good topic to, talk about, especially. So, example, something extreme like in a heterosexual relationship where, example, one partner is very, very paranoid about the other cheating, so they prevent them from, example, going outside or doing
I think you cut off there. Or cut out. Maybe you cut out, your internet went down or something?
my boyfriend.
Could you repeat,
Oh
please?
yes, sorry, I mentioned it. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. I was sort of wanted to ask a question about if we should consider good or bad in the convo. What is considered healthy, psychologically and physically?
I think that's a great question. Because like saying what is healthy, that's an incredibly like loaded statement. Things can be like considered like spiritually healthy or emotionally healthy or physically healthy, psychologically healthy, and all that type of stuff. And sometimes they kind of butt heads. Like what might be physically healthy for you might not be very psychologically healthy for you. Like imagine like eating crappy broccoli when you were growing up as a kid. It's like that caused you a lot of stress and probably like
Absolutely.
led you to crying at the dinner table, but it's healthy for you physically. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, of course, I guess that would also depend on the also the region you're born and things of the sort, because of course, I don't know if for example, what you desire would be considered, or have an effect on what's considered psychologically healthy and all that. But I guess a very extreme example. Sorry, if I cut off, just tell me. My internet is kind of bad. Uh, so a very extreme example. Let's say a heterosexual relationship where one partner is very paranoid and is scared that, example, the other might cheat. So they, example, limit the other partner, example, to go outside or to participate in recreational activities. So that causes either stress and things of the sort. And yeah, but another point maybe that would help is also maybe that. I just thought of this. I don't know exactly how it can directly relate to the convo, but that may be the reason why a monogamous relationship wouldn't be good is that if there is a case where the partner is looking for somebody else, it might be because what is in the relationship isn't necessarily entirely desired or enough as such, right? So if everything as such was good and healthy and was, enough either to uh, keep somebody satisfied, whatever it may be, then they wouldn't go looking for something else. But if they aren't actually, then maybe something else.
hey, does anyone want to speak to that? I have a couple things, but anyone else?
I have another question related to what wait, who was the one who stopped? Phoenix, was it? Yeah. So the question is, are within the limits of consent of consenting couple, are there any? I mean, even slight amounts of physical harm can be considered moral if you're talking about BDSM, for instance. Within the limits of consent, are there any grounds where we could talk about immorality?
Could you elaborate a
Are you
bit?
asking me or?
Huh?
I guess you're asking everyone, but could you elaborate a tiny bit? I'm not sure if I fully within the context of
Within the
consent.
limits of consent. So you have a consenting couple, both agree to something, both have expectations, both live in a certain manner. Uh, is there, within those limits of consent, is there a possibility for some behavior to be considered immoral?
If it violates the consent, I would feel like then that is what is immoral.
Not, no, within the limits of consent, not any violation of consent, without any violation of consent.
So like imagine I say I consent to you, Giancarlo, to be able to, I don't know, hurt me a little bit physically for whatever reason. And then you go ahead and hurt me a little
Yeah,
bit physically. Would you think that that's still correct?
yeah,
Okay, good question.
but but I would be open to someone elaborating on what would be the limits at which point it can become immoral. Because very probably, if you instead of saying slight harm, if you allowed me to shoot you and I did it, I would probably frown upon that as an outsider.
Yeah,
I mean, I could elaborate on my point for sure. If,
go for it.
okay, thanks. So basically, I think the limit should be where children is involved. I think that's why in private it would be good because both parties are consenting and it's, it doesn't affect psychologically or have the potential to affect psychologically anybody else but the two. And since the two are consenting and it seems to be fine, I wouldn't see a problem with that if it was private. But if it did have the potential to damage psychologically and affect any behavior in the future of, children or things of the sort that would be exposed to it, then I would consider it bad. Within that, have at it, That'd be my point.
I'm almost inclined to say that I think morality, if there are objective morals, they supersede consent. So I can consent to something like, let's say for example, like I can consent to being a slave, right, to someone. That doesn't make it morally correct or okay for me to consent to that. And that's why I think consent, it just gets a little bit tricky because you can consent to things that are just wrong and bad. I consent to engaging in acts of terrorism. I consent in doing these things. So I think like one thing like objective morals almost, they should come before consent.
Okay, but those involve third parties.
Are you familiar with the case in Germany of the consensual cannibalism?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
There was a guy who consented to being killed and eaten by another guy, and it caused a whole bunch of problems and questions to come arise.
Yeah, it's a good example of that.
I think the problem that we're running into, but with both the slave example and the cannibalism, is that those are things that we consent to, and then once we consent into them, we like lose the ability to consent further on, like down the road. I would generally consider most things that a person is consenting to be like morally permissible, like pretty far along. Like I might even be like pro physician assisted suicide, potentially, if given the correct circumstances. So like I don't see how like in this conversation it really matters, even with like things like health, whether the thing is healthy or not. I don't know if that even matters either. Like, would we say that it's immoral for someone to, I don't know, eat like 5 cakes in a row, even if it's unhealthy, just because like maybe they want to, you know?
Yes.
But if we agree that like it's unhealthy for someone to do something, are we gonna say it's immoral?
Yes.
That feels like a big jump for me.
Mm.
But I mean, again, it's just an intuition, so I might be led astray.
I want to make like a meta point on the conversation because I'm like listening to everyone make points. I feel like there's an interesting thing to point out. It's really important explicitly in this conversation to point out whether or not you're making a point as to the immorality or the permissibility of either of the two positions, or you're just making a general like I would prefer X over Y. Like I would prefer to be monogamous. I would prefer to be like polyamorous. I think society should be monogamous, but it's not like it's like totally permissible. I think it's really important to point out what kind of argument you're making from the examples you bring up, because a lot of people, from what I've heard, they kind of sounded like they were making points of like, oh well, like it would be bad for society, or like maybe I wouldn't like it very much, and they brought up examples. But then I think there's a really easy counterpoint to just say, well, okay, just like take someone who isn't you, who's like has the psyche that allows for them to be polyamorous and not jealous, and then what is the issue, right? You have to be really careful to point out whether or not you're making an argument to say that it's actually immoral and you have to provide reasons why, or you're just saying I wouldn't do it or I think society at large shouldn't do it.
Yeah, it's difficult to tease apart meta-ethical claims as opposed to opinion or like subjective claims. And I think it's super important to like explicitly say what angle you're attacking the question from.
I had a question on that. Like, I'm thinking it is an objective question, but I think the answers would be subjective. But the thing is, we as a society have moved on from polygamy to monogamy in recent years. And there have been reasons for that. Earlier, even if we remove the religious part, there was patriarchal structures which are still prevalent now. But along with these structures, we also had resource distribution, like not proper healthcare, not proper access to resources. And that was the reason that the society was highly patriarchal and dependent on men. And that is also one of the reasons that we see that the polygamy, which was practiced mostly in earlier days, was one man and multiple women. And we have moved on from that. So my question is, in today's world, do we need polygamy?
I think
What
there
if two
you're
people, or what
you're
if a
making
multitude of people want?
Sorry, go for it.
I was gonna say, what if, like, I understand the historical backdrop of why certain cultures would or would have not engaged in polygamy and then moved away or moved towards. But what if 5 people all decide that they want to be in a group polyamorous relationship? In modern society, they all agree that they want to. What's wrong with that?
True. So I was asking from a societal point of view, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah, no, because you were
Yeah.
giving a historical or a descriptive account of why things are the way they are. Like, we've moved into a monogamous relationship for reasons X, Y, Z, at least in certain cultures.
Yeah.
These are descriptive claims. So I feel like you're not saying that it's right or wrong. It's just like, this is what happened. It's like the evidence of what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, I should have made that clear. My bad.
No, you're good. I want to kind of go back to
Uh,
your
uh,
point on paranoia or health. Yeah, it was Phoenix, if that's okay.
yes, yeah. Oh yeah, my bad. Sorry.
You're good, you're good. Like, yeah, you gave the example of like a couple where one was in extreme paranoia and maybe didn't want the other person to go out or something like that, like just restricting their autonomy because of their, I would kind of say, like, to save their possible like psychological health. I think anyone in a state of paranoia, regardless of what that paranoia is not ever in a healthy mindset. And like, what would be more psychologically healthy for them would be to deal with that paranoia as opposed to cope with it or try and like block it. Like, do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I completely agree. My point was that it was bad for the person that is getting, that is limited by the person who is paranoid. I completely agree with you, that's the second point. And it adds to the point that maybe being in that relationship doesn't, help as such. So yeah, I completely agree. You got my point for sure.
Yeah, because then it seems like you're restricting their autonomy. And if we're going off of like Kantian principles of restricting people's autonomy, that is a moral wrong. To stop someone from going out or from just talking to other people in the world and living their lives normally, making their own choices, that is, a lot of people would consider something that's
Yeah,
meta-ethically incorrect.
But don't
yeah,
we do that
I
with jobs? Like, that's what, like, I consent to a employer restricting my ability to talk to people, forcing me into one location. I consent to that, and then in return, they pay me for it. That's like literally what a job is. I don't know if I would say this is immoral.
I don't think you can consent in the case of power differences.
In the case of what, sorry?
I mean,
I don't think you can consent in the case where there is power difference between two people.
Okay.
That's one of the bases for consent.
I agree. I think then it would be like just abusive. Like, even with like a work relationship, like if you get coerced into a job that you don't want to do and you don't have like any way to get out of that job, like that's probably immoral.
I mean, yeah, I get your point for sure. That makes sense. But I mean, of course, with a job, you probably need the money. Of course, you can make an example that if you're in a relationship, you need the contact, or maybe just a general need that you have specifically. But of course, as a job, you probably need the money generally, and you can use it to do other things. And you can, of course, make the choice to not have that job. I think that goes back also to argument for health, which is that if you're being hurt in a way that lets you, example, not have that consent. Of course, this goes back to the consent. It probably isn't good either. In a job, you can quit whenever you want, but when you can't, I think that's slavery at that point. Same goes, for example, when you can consent to get beaten, but when you get beaten to a point where you can't possibly not give consent anymore or strict consent, then it would be bad. See, so I think that's also a nuance to take into account.
I agree. Consent is good. I think I think we all agree that jobs and polyamorous relationships, they're like one and the same.
I also think we need to I have a question, is a relationship transactional or not? Because in the instances of like an employer-employee, you're getting paid to do certain work, remove consent, all that type of stuff, but it's transactional. So long as you're respecting each other's autonomy and stuff like that, then, Kant says thumbs up, that's fine. But is a relationship transactional? Like, oh, I'm getting the feeling of safety, security, emotional stability, and you're getting that too. So that's that? Or is there something more, the specialness argument basically, is there something more to a romantic relationship than other types of possibly transactional relationships?
I mean, I don't want to be like a Jordan Peterson here, but what do you mean by relationship?
A relationship.
You mean a relationship, like example, a relation, like example, your relation to your employer, or do you mean a relationship as if,
Let's say
as
a
in love,
romantic
or something of
relationship
the sort?
versus other relationships versus transactional relationships. Like, because transactional relationships is like you give someone something, they give something to you, and that's the basis of the relationship. If you break that transaction, there's no more a good, healthy relationship. Is a
That
romantic
can be
relationship?
every relationship. Like I mean, it depends what you're
Unconditional love.
transacting. Like,
I feel like it depends on the lens you're like using to analyze things. Like you can view any relationship transactionally if you really think about it hard enough.
What about
But like
unconditional
you
love?
can also do the opposite. But like I can view my job. What if I really love my job, Chris? Have you consider that? Like, what if I don't think of it transactionally?
Well, like,
What if I,
because if
love
you're
the
not
work I
getting
do?
anything from it, then it's no longer transactional. Think about the love a mother has for a kid, and the kid might hate the mom and like tell her to fuck off or whatever. That's an unconditional type of love where there's no more nothing's coming back, but it's still
Oh
love.
yeah.
You know?
Okay, you convince. I think that's bad. No, I feel like if a parent's in a position where they're basically that they're like giving love to a person who's never gonna love them back, that feels like a really awful position to be in. Yeah, I guess we should. You know what? You're right, Chris. You black pilled me. We should think of every relationship transactionally. Okay, you're correct. So that's how we get most out of life. Thank you, Chris.
I disagree. I think it's more than transaction. It's about boundaries, and one of those boundaries is, for example, not being a dead weight on the relationship. I mean, stuff doesn't need to be absolutely 50-50 for stuff to work. Doesn't need to be I do this, you do that. But one of the usual boundaries is to do something to do things to make the relationship work, to not be that weight on a relationship.
I have a anecdote. So I know of this older couple where the man, he's never been there emotionally for his partner, for the woman. He's kind of like just a deadbeat alcoholic with problems, innumerable problems. But despite all of that, the wife still loves him unconditionally and would never leave him. Is this type of unconditional love the basis of like a strong, lasting monogamous relationship, but just like an unfortunate case of it? Or should all monogamous, long-term, good, healthy relationships always be conditional?
Here, I'll try to put forward a positive argument in favor of why polyamory and polygamy are impermissible. I think that fundamentally, there are three kinds of relationship in human. There are non-chosen familiar relationships, and we all kind of intuit this. People have this understanding of like blood is thicker than water, this kind of thing. Family is something you don't turn your back on, sort of a view that is very common, and it's because in some sense you don't choose your family, and then there's a value to family that goes beyond the fact that you didn't have a choice to pick the family you were born in. And then there's the complete opposite, which is your friendships and your not like non-romantic and familiar relationships. Every friendship, no matter how strong, no matter how long lasting, is absolutely transactional and is absolutely, insofar you are only friends, insofar as both people maintain the friendship and want to continue there.
I think I disagree with that
If
point.
you, yeah, the
I feel
friendships
like you
or
can have friends who you unconditionally love, regardless of what they will do, regardless of what they do to you or what they think of you.
I disagree entirely. Yeah. I think, and I have to, for the point that I'm trying to make, because what I would say is that I would say that romantic relationships are the ideal romantic relationship, the form of romantic relationship, if you will, is one of unconditioned love, but chosen unconditioned love, which you have to like unpack what that means, because that sounds kind of contradictory when you say it out loud. But like I could unpack that if necessary. But it's the entering into an environment that is conducive to the generation of unconditional love, and it's not pre-existing, because there's a degree to which familiar relationships, the unconditional love is kind of pre-existing on the existence of the relationship itself, but in a romantic relationship it's you journey towards it. And so in that example of like the woman and like her husband, that's like them journeying towards it, and he's failing but she is succeeding, and so that is absolutely an example, but it's just a unfortunate example for her, because she's not receiving what she's getting in terms of the she's not getting a partner in that circumstance. She's carrying both of them up the hill, and good on her. She's sounds like an incredible woman. Bad on him. Sounds like he's a pretty terrible guy in that sense, at least. And we can fall short of that ideal, obviously. No human can ever live up to an ideal, but that doesn't mean that the ideal doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that we venture towards it in all ways.
I think there's a reason we
And
call.
so furthermore, polyamory is not the kind of relationship that's conducive to the generation of unconditioned love.
I think there's.
I had a question on unconditional love.
Sorry, go for it.
Yeah. So the thing is that when we say that a mother has an unconditional love for a child, what I have noticed is that there are some reasons why the child doesn't reciprocate the same love he has for his mother as the mother has for him. So what I've basically seen is that they derive pleasure from expressing their love towards their child. So it's like a self-interest for her. Like it gives her a pleasure to express her love towards the son, even though her son does not like it. Like he hates it. He doesn't want her pleasure because she has, maybe because it has ended up bad for him, but she still derives pleasure from it. So is it really unconditional, or is she just acting in her self-interest?
The strong point. Is loving someone pleasureful? If it is pleasureful, then is it just a type of like hedonism? It's like we love people because it feels good to love people. And in that sense, you're just like scratching your own back when the object is an indirect one.
Very, very small disagreement, just a tiny bit disagreement. I'd say the self-interest is not in the expression of love, but in the well-being of the other. The well-being of the other being okay, is what gives me pleasure. I would make that small distinction.
It could also be that a mother or a father makes their life's meaning based on their child. Like they have nothing to do in life. Their major part of their life is their child. So whatever they are doing for their child, they are doing it for themselves, for fulfilling their own meaning. I think it is called logotherapy, in which you find your life's meaning and try to fulfill it, something like that.
Well, my main point of contention was that even though the child does not want to associate with his mother will still associate with him by expressing love. And I think the same applies to the point of friendships, where you mentioned that you can have friends who you may unconditionally love, even though they won't like you or do things that you don't like to you.
Yeah, but I think there's a little bit of an issue when it comes, for example, to wanting in a relationship what the other person wants, or being happy in a relationship when it comes to the other person being happy. Because of course, if that's the case for the other person, you get into a little bit of a paradox, and it still technically can be considered a transaction at that point. in my opinion, of course, because if that person, I don't know, isn't happy uh, in a certain way, then of course you won't be happy, and of course you probably won't be in a relationship if you're not very happy. That's how I think of it. Of course, there are societal norms, and that maybe can play into the role of example, the mother and her unconditional love and why she is loving her son, things of the sort. I think that can definitely go back, example, with or to your example of the old lady and the man, because it still might be a transaction as such, because it might also help when it comes to relieving or fulfilling a certain idea of a norm of what should be considered good and bad. So she might be happy that she's fulfilling her role either as a wife, well, in this case, a wife, and that will
Yeah,
still be
I
a
do
form of
agree.
transaction. Same thing with the husband. Of course, he doesn't seem to be as happy as she is, but it's still a form of transaction, in my opinion. It can be a transaction of, abstract things of different levels of happiness that are still considered not being happy. That's also why I think in religion, when it demands that you suffer a certain way, but then if suffering is good, then well, you're still happy to suffer. I'm not really using the words very well here, but I hope you kind of understand what I'm saying.
Yeah,
And in
on
the
that
case of
point,
wife,
but just really quick,
and in
I
the
think
case,
it's wrong to fixate on like love being unconditional, or like our goal relationship is one where someone has unconditional love for the other person. Like I don't think we should fixate on these things. Our goal when we're going into a relationship is to have two people who are able to have better life outcomes, are more happy because they are in a relationship, and the relationship in itself is conducive to making two independent beings better together. Like that should be our goal. Is just two people that are happier together, and having these situations where
True.
like a wife or like a spouse is sitting there with their like husband or something that went to war, and she's just unconditionally loving him, like sending letters, and he might just be dead, and she's doing this for like 20 years. These are things that are one harmful to the person because they eventually will self-destruct on them. Like this unconditional love does not actually is not reciprocated, right? That's like part of the unconditional love, is that if it's not reciprocated, you're still giving, right? Like you're giving in a very, I want to call it like parasitical on the other person, in that like they're just taking the love that you're giving them without ever reciprocating it. Like that seems like such a intuitively harmful situation to be in, for that person to just like be providing love, putting so much energy out there and getting nothing back. I truly like do not value getting to this stage. I recognize that like a lot of people will have this sort of relationship with their children, and I'm not saying it's harmful. I don't know if this should be our end goal for relationships.
I completely
Well,
agree. Sure.
yeah, but the counterpoint to that
and
argument is that the example that was provided was the wife is unconditionally loving a husband who does not love her, right?
Very
But
possibly.
suppose there is a case that, yeah, so suppose there is a case that a husband and a wife were married for suppose 2 years at first, both loved each other, they loved each other, it was not one sided. Then some ex bad thing happened, and the husband started treating the wife very badly. But because the wife still loved her because of the 2 years of experiences, she still loved him unconditionally. So she forgave the bad things he did to her. And then after a year, the husband stopped, apologized, and they were back together. So the thing is that in that 1 year window where the husband treated her badly, the wife could have just completely left the relationship because she was not being treated right. Or instead, what she did was she kept loving her husband unconditionally and gave him a chance to change.
in this case, it could
Sure.
also be that the wife fears uncertainty, and it still leaves him. Human fears uncertainty, and even if he is beating her or scolding her, she is familiar with it. She has become familiar with it, and it could also be that she has left nowhere to go, or she fears what will happen if she leaves him.
No, I wasn't talking about conditioning. The only point of contention I was making was that like there can be cases where loving someone unconditionally, even while being treated wrong, may lead to outcomes that are not so bad. Like in this case, the husband changing and they are in a happy relationship again. That's all.
I don't
So
contest that like
that
unconditional love can lead to good outcomes. Like that happens for sure. But I'm just saying, like, by and large, I don't think that happens. I think by and large, people who are left in these unconditional love situations where they're loving someone who's never going to reciprocate, I think generally that is a harmful relationship that doesn't pan out in a positive way. And secondly, I think that the wife would have been completely justified if she moved on. And I think it's usually better for people to just move on, grieve past that relationship, and better themselves by going into a relationship where they can get some sort of energy back when they're loving someone.
I think we might have competing, or at least I do. I have a competing intuition when it comes to entering a relationship. I wouldn't like to think that I enter a relationship because I can somehow better myself, get something out of it, make my life better in any way. It's more so about if I can make someone else's life better, because you love them or you care for them. Yeah, I don't know. Even if they wouldn't take a bullet for me, the point of a relationship is for me to want to take a bullet for someone. Bettering my own life,
Yeah, I
that's
mean
up to
that
me.
makes sense for sure.
hello guys. I want to question unconditional love itself. Do you guys believe it is there? Because I think that a lot of us love subconsciously or consciously based on face, voice, body, and how they behave to us, their personality, culture, and a lot of other things comes into that. So do you guys really believe in unconditional love?
You're a
Like
little
if
bit
someone
muffled.
is scolding you, what?
Could you speak a little bit louder, please? A little bit
Um,
like muffled.
hello, am I audible now?
Yep.
So should I say it again
Please, yeah.
from the start? So my question is unconditional love true? Like we love based on face, body, height, shape, culture, personality, and how they are with us, how they are behaving with us and around us, things like that. And other factors come in that too, psychological and biological things. So, like if someone is scolding you, giving you slangs or back bitching about you, will you ever fall in love with them? I don't think so. So, is unconditional love true?
No, I don't think so. Not
If
at all.
someone
I
is
mean,
behaving right with you, that's why you are falling in love with them, right?
I don't think so.
but I mean, the way I view his example, the standard that Chris gave example, what did you say about you being in a relationship? Like example, if you're in a relationship, you didn't want to better yourself, or you didn't think of it as such. You
Just like
said that.
bettering myself and making my life better, having better experiences, that's something I need to do for myself, just like as a type of imperative.
Yeah,
It's not going out to
yeah,
seek someone to make my life better.
of course. But example, if you did go into a relationship with a certain standard, for example, uh, not making that harder for yourself, or you went into a relationship so that doing that isn't hard, that's still a standard that could be considered. Just a second. Yeah. So example, that can be still considered a standard that you could use as a transaction relationship. Makes it, definition, not unconditional. A good example is dogs, right? They say, oh, dogs love is unconditional. Yeah, we'll stop giving it food. And if it builds the idea that if they act a certain way, they'll get what they want, it's not unconditional. And I don't think the transaction has to be conscious. It doesn't have to be a conscious transaction. Such. It can even be a standard that negates something else. It doesn't have to be I want something. If it's not there, then I'm out. It can be okay. Well, if it doesn't uh, makes something worse, then that's okay. Okay, that's still a standard, which makes it a transaction.
Is this standard a transaction?
I feel like
Can be,
if
yeah,
what
for
you're
sure.
saying is true, then like why wouldn't you just tend towards like one-way parasocial relationships? Like you can fulfill all your desires right now, Chris. If you just go online, search up pictures of whatever woman you want, and then just attach yourself to that woman. You said you don't care if they, provide you energy back, right?
Mhm.
So it seems like it would fulfill all your desires. You provide them love, you give energy to that person, you would take a bullet for them, even
But
if you don't.
The thing is, you can't, even if I chose a random girl across the world on the internet, it takes something for someone to accept love. That's you can impart a bunch of love and good feelings to people, but if they're not open to receiving it, then it's not the same type of giving. And it
Why do you
takes
care about that?
I don't know, because I think it's one of the most like fundamental or fulfilling experiences a person can have to give and them want to receive, not in a superficial or like any type of way like that.
So like, do you think your desires would be fulfilled with like a AI girlfriend who like accepts all the love that you want to give,
If we can somehow
and they're
prove
like
its
consenting to it?
sentience, if we can somehow prove its sentience and all like that, which is a whole can of worms in itself, then maybe. But
If
yeah.
there are many girls
Can you
ready
guys
to accept your love, then
okay?
I
Can you guys
personally
just
feel like
make it
there's
clear
something missing
what do you
with like
mean
an
by?
AI relationship.
One.
Well, I just had a question. Like, can you guys just like clarify what do you mean by unconditionality? Because if you're saying that some ex needs to accept my love, then I don't see how it is unconditional anymore because they are accepting. Unless you mean that unconditionality also means that someone has to accept and then not provide the love back.
Well, I
So
think
what do you mean by unconditional love?
unconditional is a little bit different than the pleasure you might gain from exporting or like giving love. I think those are different things. And I was saying that the reason I would want a relationship is to be able to give love, um, not to achieve unconditional love.
Yeah, but why?
I
Like
don't know.
again,
It's a good
if it's
question.
just a feeling, I get it. Yeah, that's a
Mhm.
good answer. Like I won't question it further. It seems kind of personal for you,
Yeah,
this
I
whole
don't know.
convo.
It's an
But yeah, like
intuition. Yeah.
yeah,
But
exactly.
like,
But
Chris, like I will literally take all the love you want to give me, right? But you wouldn't do that. Like clearly, your actions are not in conjunction with your beliefs.
Well, then
Like
no.
there are plenty of people who are willing to receive all the love you're willing to give, but you're not giving your love to them. So
There's a
clearly, there's some
practicality
other criteria.
there's a practicality issue there though. I can't give
I
everyone all the love all the time. Like that's just not practical, but I
I
do
want
try
to
to give as much love to as many people as possible in as many small or big forms as possible.
But I feel like there's something else you care about. It definitely.
Maybe.
Surely you care about them reciprocating in some manner. Surely.
It's better, it feels better when they do so, but that's not like an ultimate like in
Like
life
you don't
like
care.
yeah, I don't know, like
Would you
so does
like?
that
Would you like
I
be in a
want to
relationship
point
if there was
out.
like some mute
Hello.
deaf person who like didn't even like interact with you, but like would receive all your love? Like they were sentient, they were a
yeah.
sentient conscious being, but like anytime you said something, there was no response. It was just like radio silence on the other end.
If I completely loved them, I'd like to think that yes. But I don't know if I could ever get to the point of completely loving them. I'm confused at what it takes to be in love with someone completely. It's a lot of confusing
Okay.
intuitions
I
and
want to
feelings.
point out that even if there is unconditional love, it is based on conditions of the one you are loving.
It could be, but
You
whether or not
might
those
die
conditions
for.
are in our control is something else.
What do you mean by that?
For example, unconditional love for a mom and their kid, the conditions are because it's the son or the kid. That's like very situational and things happen. We can't control who we meet in life or the environments we are placed in or the people that are around us, but we do end up loving them unconditionally for one reason or another.
Chris, I'm
So
curious to you.
if there is a reason, then it is not unconditional, right?
No, I don't think so.
I'm curious how you feel
Then
about this
what is
distinction, Chris.
unconditional?
Tell me if this strikes you as like plausible or not.
I,
I think
I,
there's a
wait,
difference
I,
between.
Sorry, go Martin or Carson.
Do you think there's a difference between contextual conditions and agential conditions? So like there being conditions of context, conditions of the situations we find ourselves in, and the conditions of like, because I think there's something very, very, very different to the circumstance of the loveless marriage where the wife unconditionally loves her husband and the husband doesn't love her back. I think that's a condition. I think that's a circumstantial condition. Whereas like, I think there's agential conditions which are like everyone's probably familiar with like the TikTok meme with like the like I want a guy in finance who's 6'5", blue eyes, that song that blew up, right? That's like that to me is agential condition, right? That's conditions that I'm conscious putting on the relationship for me to be satisfied, for me to love the person. But then there's conditions of circumstance where it's literally like if someone is beating me to death, right? Seems like that's a different kind of condition, quote unquote. And I feel like you can call it conditional in the same way that you can call every relationship transactional. But it almost feels like you're killing the word so much by making it apply to so many circumstances that it's unclear what you're actually referring to in the first place. And so if you want to say that all relationships are transactional, you're losing any sense of what that word means. And insofar as you also want to say that it's conditional to like put beauty standards on your partner, and it's also conditional to be like they need to treat me in a way that's like not like murdering me or something like that. To call those both conditions, I think also it does a disservice to the conversation. And
Yeah,
you
no.
also reduce the word condition to like basically meaningless.
I think you make a really good point because when I talk about unconditional love, it's almost something like, I don't want to say divine because I don't want to give it like that theological dimension, but it's something almost like ineffable. And that's why it gets so fluffy when you take it to the extremes. But yeah, I don't have good answers. That's why I kind of wanted to do this topic. Because there are intuitions that I can't justify through argument. And I'm sure we all have those.
I still have some doubts. Maybe we are defining different definition to the word unconditional love here. What is your definition of unconditional love?
I would say not expecting anything in return.
I have a counter argument to that. I think we shouldn't underestimate the component of pleasure because there's a reason why we love the people that we see and not the people that we don't see. And that is that the people that we see have the possibility of having a response to us.
Agreed.
They can answer.
Yeah, but if you're
why aren't you giving your money to the poor kids on the other side of the world?
Yeah.
It's not just a practicality the reason. It's also because you can see the a response to your actions here.
You're saying it's not like a true altruistic like love of the other, like unconditionally. So there's a transactional element to it. It's basically what you're saying.
But transactional, saying transactional is makes it a loaded word. I mean, it has a connotation.
No, we can just detach
it makes
the
it feel
connotation.
bad.
I don't think it's good to avoid words because you feel like they have a bad connotation.
Yeah. Let's not avoid it, but it doesn't make it bad. There's a component of pleasure, and that doesn't make love bad.
Agreed.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we could say that. Like, there's, but like at the same time, would you say that like, so do you think you have the genuine ability to love somebody that you don't have the chance of interacting with?
I mean, maybe you can, but usually you love the people who are closer to you, and that's statistically true.
I don't think you can have a sentiment towards somebody that you don't know, for example, or you aren't exposed to. Like, I have no opinion on some random name that I come up with out of a hat until I have some experience of that person or interaction with that person. I don't really think that's how we like form things. So I don't know if it's even capable. It's within the domain for you to have love for
So
somebody
maybe you
that
could be
don't
fond
have
of
that.
someone who you're helping, even though there's no possible response from that other person. I could see that being a possibility. Let's say you're in a charity, and the charity is helping people from another side part of the world, and you know nothing about these people, but you know that you're making a positive effect of them, and you feel fond of them, and you sort of love them, even you have no idea who they are, how they look, and
You're saying
it's
sort of love them. I don't think we're talking about the same love at that point. I think love has to be for an individual, like love in the context of this conversation, for it to be unconditional love in the way that we're talking about.
The
It's
charity could
specifically
also
between two
mean that we just
individuals.
want to do social good.
sorry.
The charity could also mean that we just want to do social good, and it is not unconditional love. It could also mean that uh, we just want to help others
Yeah, that's just
for no
psychological
reason.
egoism.
Or
Just like saying it
We
brings
use
you
yeah,
like
pleasure. Yeah.
yeah,
But not that.
we use these terms all
or
the
to
time.
do good within ourselves, to think good of ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, we use these terms all the time, almost like meaninglessly. Like, oh, I love this food. But like, I don't think that's the same thing as like me loving a partner or like a parent or something like that. I think these are very different concepts that we're talking about. And I feel like when we talk about like a class of people, you saying like, oh, you're doing a charity and there's these recipients, these benefactors, um, and you have some like feeling of like kind of love for them. Well, that kind of is like the same kind of love that you have for like chocolate or a video game or like a nation or something. It's not the same as like an individual um, person to person love in the way that we
Mm,
would like usually talk about it.
And I don't think that even the mothers love unconditionally, because why do you love only your son and daughter unconditionally? Why will a father die only for their children? And why not someone else? Because uh,
Okay, so
because they are their children. Their my comes there. It can also be a form of ego. My children, and there is also one thing that their whole life's meaning is their child. They are living for their child, so they get their meaning of living from their children. So I don't think that is the mother's love for their child and the father's love for their child is unconditional.
well, that's not okay. So I don't think that fits when we talk about like a condition. So I think the definition that Chris gave for conditional was
And
like really
one
good
more
in the
thing, if it is unconditional, then why do you force your children to do this job, study there? You are making him do the things that you wanted yourself to do, your own unfulfilled dreams, or just to prove to society that my son is this and that. It
I
could
mean,
not be unconditional love if you are forcing him to um, behave as you like and to choose the religion, follow the customs, whatever you do.
Well, a lot of people have
It is just
children and they love them conditionally. That's the answer, I think.
so don't even think that
yeah.
like human love is like infallible in this way that you're talking about, or like even if we like love someone like unconditionally, like we have like a perfect understanding of what it means to advocate for the good of them. It's just that we're doing so within the greatest of our possible like knowledge or the set of like things that we've considered. So if we consider that like, hey, this is what I would have wanted to do, you can obviously like project that out. Now to the earlier thing, like when Chris said like unconditional love is loving somebody with like nothing in with no expectation of anything in return. I feel like that's like a pretty good example, and if we or a pretty good definition, and if we run with that, there's this idea of like in kind of like biological theory and all of that um, called Hamilton's rule of altruism, which basically says that like the amount that you care about like any given individual or any given being is dependent on like how much like gene material you share with that person. And so like ultimately at like a biological level, if we were to put like a kid that you like
adopted versus like a biological child of yours, there would be a difference, or like there's some degree to which you could like make that assessment. That is not conditional in the same way of like expecting somebody to buy you gifts or flowers or something like that is conditional. It's almost like an inalienable characteristic of that person. It's not, the condition comes from action, not from state. So I don't think it's fair to equate like, well, it's conditional because you only love your children and not somebody else's children, and so the condition is them being your children. I don't think that's a fair condition to disqualify the idea of unconditional love.
Chris, can you explain it in short?
Sure. If you have like if somebody is your child and you have some shared biological material with them, that's an inalienable characteristic. That's non-changing. That's not an expectation you have of them. That's just what they are, who they are. So it's not fair to say that that's a conditional love in the way that we're talking about it here.
Sorry, I still didn't understand. Chris,
Not
can you
sure how
explain
else
it?
to. I'm really not sure how else to explain that. Does anyone else want to have a crack at it if they understood my point?
Chris, wait a minute. Chris, can you explain the same thing to me?
Okay. If I
I'm
have a child,
saying Chris to explain
yeah.
it. Chris,
Okay.
hello.
Yes.
Can you explain it? The thing is saying.
So if I have a child and I
Why
love that
is he
child,
not explaining?
He is. I don't think your internet might not be working.
okay.
Maybe let's just move on if someone else has another point or something else to.
I think I want to keep harping on this point actually. If someone who's been defending this idea that like everything is transactional, can you give a clear set criterion for what a relationship would have to be like if it wasn't transactional? Because I my worry with these kinds of things, because like I once was like the kind of person who was like, there is no such thing as altruism. Altruism is bullshit. But I've thought about that more, and I think a lot of these kinds of things boil down to like, there's different definitions of words that we can use when we say words like altruism or transactional or conditional. And if the definition that you're attacking is like a unilateral definition, then I would just argue that the definition you're attacking is useless. If it applies in all cases or in no cases, it's not a particularly useful definition. The point of having a category or a way to describe a state of affairs is that you can distinguish it from a different state of affairs. And so if you're describing a concept that applies to everything, that doesn't, probably not particularly helpful when it comes to discriminating between contexts.
I really disagree with this.
Okay, you can, 1 second. I want someone who's been defending this idea that everything is transactional to give me a clear cut understanding of what transactional means. And what would it look like for a relationship to not be transactional?
I would say one of the things is that the person who is showing unconditional love does not have a connotation of deriving pleasure from it. Like someone raised a point about well-being of the children. Maybe I can concede to that. Yes, if the mother is loving the child unconditionally and that love is shown in her hoping in the well-being of her son in the way that the son stays happy even if he doesn't reciprocate back the love, there is no self-interest or pleasure derived from it. I would say it is unconditional, totally.
Okay. I mean, I think that's a way too strict of a criterion. I think it's probably just a biological fact that in most people there is like an inalienable sense of pleasure derived from familiar relationships, probably baked into us by evolution, that evolution baked into us some degree of like, I mean, we know this to a certain degree. We know that babies react positively to their mother, and if they don't pair bond properly by like skin contact and all these various things, it can have really detrimental outcomes. A lot of these things are biologically programmed into us. Like you can like I
Well,
said, you can
it's
see this
not
in
only
babies,
about
where babies have
mother-son
these kinds of
relationship.
relationships with their
Yeah.
mother. They have these kinds of reactions that are testable. So I think that criterion is just far too stringent. I mean, I think as our nature, as biological mechanisms with some degree of animalia to us and some degree of instinct, you're not going to be able to have a. I don't think it'll be particularly useful to invoke things like pleasure, these sort of like non-react or non-conscious reactions to states of affairs when it comes to talking about things like relationships.
Well, it's not only about biological relationships. Like I think Chris mentioned that he uh, claimed that we can have unconditional friendships where even if a friend doesn't reciprocate back the love you give them, you can at least still hope for their well-being, right? Like you don't have to pray for their downfall. You can just love them as a friend, even if they don't particularly
Yeah,
treat you
I had a
better,
quick
right?
a
That
quick
can be
comment
unconditional.
on your second point before, when you were describing the three types of relationships that people can have: the unconditional ones, the friendship types ones, the romantic ones. And when it came to the friendship ones, I think there is some truth or some reason to why we might call a close friend a brother or a sister. It's almost, and why we would take a bullet for them even though they might not take a bullet for us. I think maybe there's some sort of weird psychological wiring that goes on when we have really close friends. It's almost like they become family, and then they become this type of like undecided, unconditional relationship. That's the only thing I wanted to add to like my point.
I agree with that. I think that's. I think at that point, that's when it's when they jump from like family to they jump from friend to family. Like I have people who are non-familiar, like non-blood related people that I would consider family, and I would like treat them exactly how I would treat family. And I would agree that's like it's like a it. There's a degree to which there's a switch that goes off that you just stop looking at them as like someone that you're choosing to be around and someone that is just like part of your life and will never not be a part of your life.
Can I bring back
With that,
to
yeah.
Arshia, yeah.
can I bring back to the comment you made earlier, Carson?
Sure, about the categories.
Yeah, about the categories.
Go
So
for it.
first question I'd ask though before that is, do you think that what is the value you see in having a defined unconditional love? What is it? What does it give? Why is it important, in your opinion, to believe that such a thing exists? Because you seem to be defending it. I wonder what utility does that bring for you to believe in such a thing?
I don't particularly know if there is utility or not. I mean, I think there's elements of rationality that you're forced to believe in, even if you don't want to, or they're inconvenient.
Sure. Is there like a psychological benefit to believing in such a thing existing? Like a
Probably to
for
some
you?
degree.
Okay, sure. So I think you remember like earlier we were having a conversation about like, can you like do something that you like truly didn't want to do in like the truest sense of like not wanting to do it, right? Can
Yeah.
you will yourself to do like something that you like truly at like the most fundamental level do not want to do? And we agreed that you probably couldn't, right?
Yeah.
So somebody's a slave, for example, we probably wouldn't go along with the argument of like, well, this person is actually doing so by choice, by will, because they couldn't do anything that they like truly didn't want to do given their constraints. We probably wouldn't go with that argument. We'd say that like that's like a pretty useless or like poor way of like understanding the state of affairs going on there. And we'd like move back to like more auxiliary forms of like control, like, well, this person is not truly choosing or they're not actually doing what they want to do because they're under some duress or force or whatever, right? Would you agree with that?
I'll tentatively grant it. Sure.
Okay, sure. So we still acknowledge the fact that at the fundamental level there is this value to acknowledging this like fact of the matter where you can't do something which you truly don't want to do, and this is just a facthood, like it's just a state of affairs. It is how it is. um all the same, it doesn't detract from our ability to make comments or assertions about human behavior or to give the other forms of value. I think the same thing is true of like arguments from altruism or transactional. I think ultimately, if you were to boil it down, the most base level, all relationships are transactional. all relationships you engage in some of this behavior where you're getting something out of it by choosing to engage in that relationship, and therefore there's always some transactional assessment that you're making. And so like even if we grant that like for all intents and purposes this thing is unconditional and there's no case where you could ever have a non-transactional relationship, it's still important in my opinion to acknowledge that like at the root level of it, when you go down deep enough, it just seems to be a case of like how humans behave, that we only engage in relationships that we in some way or another want to engage in or gain some value from engaging in, compared to like the cognitive dissonance or some other value from like not being in it.
Yeah, but that the like where the I don't see a problem with this is that I don't think you fundamentally choose what you want. And so insofar as you don't fundamentally choose what you want, you're less you're less what would the analogy? You're less an author writing a book and you're more like a sailor lost at sea, right? You don't actually get to choose the direction of the waves that the waves are pulling you in. You just have to go along with them because you are just simply unable to do otherwise, right? There's a fundamental level at which you are just being pushed or pulled in a direction and there is nothing you can do to stop it. And moreover, fundamentally, because they're your wants, they're your basic desires, they're what fundamentally are motivating you, you actually can't want otherwise, right? Because you can't have second order volitions to change base order wants because second order volitions stem from base order volitions. And so you can't even want to be not a sailor lost at sea, fundamentally. Whatever sea you're in, everyone's in their own separate sea of basal desires that you can't choose otherwise. And so not only can you not choose otherwise, you couldn't even choose to want to choose otherwise, right? And so I don't see a problem with that.
But how is this any different from like the case of like you engaging in only actions that you want to do? Because I think me and you both don't believe in free will. So if we're going by that position of not believing in free will, everything must be induced somehow by some process or another. Every choice or every whatever by some like precondition or induced in some other way. So you can't even choose what you want to do or any of that. So it's the same. It's analogous, is it not?
Well, wait. Okay, maybe I misunderstood your first point then. Because fundamentally, right, I don't think love is a choice.
Do you think
That's
do
why.
you
That's
think
actually why.
anything
Like, do I
is
think
a
what?
choice? Do you think anything is a choice in the way that you would say it's a choice?
Not in a fundamental sense.
Okay, then
There are no fundamental choices.
how
There are.
okay.
There are like emergent choices, but there are no basal choices.
Are there
Why does it matter to talk about emergent choices if we're agreeing that fundamentally there is no choices?
Because emergent choices are crucial when it comes to like what's the term I'm looking for? Adjudicating cases of like responsibility insofar as it's emergent responsibility.
Sure. Okay, I agree with this, but like if we agree that we do this for like some pragmatic end, right? So I don't
No,
see
I think it's actually fundamental.
Oh, okay.
I think I'm not it's emergent, but insofar as it's emergent, it's fundamentally like it has to be emergent. I think that ethics
It's
is
necessarily so. Okay.
yeah, because I think I mean you know my position on all of this, right?
Yeah, I can.
Like the virtuous state of affairs is being insofar as you can't want to even do otherwise, right? The truly virtuous person in whatever circumstance they find themselves doesn't even have the thought to not do the virtuous thing. Virtue is not some like deliberation under ideal conditions where you decide among like I could do bad, I could do good, and I choose good. The truly virtuous state is doing good. The truly like the quintessential example is like the mother who just like goes and saves her child in the burning building, and she doesn't even have the thought to say, I don't want to get burned, I don't want to get hurt myself, da 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 da. Like that is actually indication of not being in like the being in the ideal virtuous state. If you to even have those thoughts is to suggest that you have some viciousness going on. The truly virtuous state is the mom who just runs into the burning building on pure instinct. Right? There are no choices being made in that matter. And we adjudicate these kinds of ethical considerations on these ideals, and then it has to emerge out in the physical world because obviously the ideals can't be instantiated. The physicality can't instantiate ideals. Ideality.
And you
I don't
think
know
like
what the word
love
would be.
is like emergent thing, right? Like from like some physical state. It's not
No, I think I think love is an ideal, and I think the way we insofar as we instantiate it physically is imperfect.
Okay.
But it's still an ideal that we're venturing towards. That's why I said, I don't think you were here when I said, but I think romantic relationships, monogamous romantic relationships, are the right kinds of states of affairs that give rise to the give rise to this ideal form of love, even if we could never even in principle achieve it.
That seems like it's. Is there a fundamental reason why that couldn't be the case in a polyamorous relationship?
Yes.
Fundamentally so?
Yes, fundamentally so. It has to be binary, or not. Well, what is not binary? What is it? It has to be
one to one.
two people. Yeah, it has to be 1 to 1. It can't be 1 to many. You can't engage in the right kinds of things in a 1 to many situation.
Yeah, but can you individually have, like, instead of like a polycule, it's several separate relationships, so you don't have a 1 to many. You have several 1 to ones.
You can't devote the right kinds of things to yourself. Like what Chris is saying, right? This idea of like taking a bullet for someone, these kinds of things that demarcate what we would kind of think of as true love. These things can only properly occur in a 1 to 1 setting, right? There's the situations in which you develop. Now, that might be the case that's a physical, that might be like an emergent constraint, but I think it is the case in
people. I'm confused. It doesn't have to be one to, it can be
If
one
you have
to
like
many.
2 kids, if you have like 2 children, and like one's on the left and one's on the right, will you have to admit that like you can never truly love both?
No.
You have to save one from like a burning building?
I'm talking about familial. That's why I made the distinction for familial and romantic.
Why would there be a distinction?
But if you said
this
that
level?
friendships can make their way into the familial realm, then that just seems like there can be a lot of almost infinite people that we would take bullets for if we can form those relationships.
Yeah, because there's a different ontological status between the familial, the friendship, and the platonic, the familial, and the romantic.
Which one's highest? Which one is of highest value or priority? If there's a priority relation between them.
Imagine there was someone, because I'm sure this person exists out
Probably.
there. I'm sure this person exists out there in the world, and they say they have 2 or more romantic relationships that are of the highest caliber or of the highest order, whom both he would take a bullet for. What would you say to this person? Because I'm sure that person a claim will be made if you ask every person in the world. Someone will make a case for that. And as long as there's one case for that, then this tautology, or this like absolute claim, it falls.
Well, crucially, when I say take a bullet for, I don't literally mean take a bullet for as a criterion. I mean that kind of thing, right?
Sure. Okay. So do you think
there's going to be, in that context, there's going to be something that person would do for one that they wouldn't do for the other.
Okay.
Right.
In a familial thing, you say it could be 1 to many, right? Like you can have multiple family members that you have this like same familial love for, right?
Yes.
Okay. That means that you're kind of inherently placing like the romantic above the familial, because that's 1 to 1 and the other one. Okay.
I think maybe. I'm not sure. I'm thinking about this,
So
but I think
truly,
maybe
like, deepest connection that you could ever have is going to be with your romantic partner, and then your like children or your parents are going to be like a tier below that. Is there like any grounds for why it fundamentally has to be so, or is it just that you feel like it is? Because like you could just say that they're like, this is also 1 to many, and that one's also 1 to many, and you could just lump them into like this like big category. But like you seem to be placing this like priority relationship, but I don't know if there's like any reason that yeah, exactly, it's an opinion. There's no like fundamentally absolute reason why it must be the case. I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to think about it more.
Yeah, okay. I wonder if your opinion on this would change if you had children.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm just gonna end the recording now because it's been going on for like 2 hours. But I'll stay on and we'll keep chatting. Unless anyone has a last word for the people who make it 2 hours into a recording.
Good luck.
Hey Chris.
Thanks for getting so far.
I was the guy who texted you just before this thing.
I'll get to that. Yeah, I'll get to that for sure.
And I still don't know what Arsia said because I heard it, but I didn't.
I'll explain it later.
But it's okay. It's okay.